And I'm Leah Hauser.
I'm the Director of Instructional Services.
And I'm the Director of Business Services.
And we are here tonight to tell you a little bit about federal funding and how that impacts the Sparta Area School District.
So I oversee the budget process for the district and the budget itself. And for probably as far back as the budget goes, federal funding has always been a part of school funding. And in the state of Wisconsin, and specifically in Sparta with some of our demographics, federal funding is a huge part of our budget, and our budget translates into what we're able to do for kids every day. And so today we're going to go over kind of an overview of what federal funds are in that process, what we do to make sure that we're complying with those federal funds. We'll tell you our different sources of federal funding and then the impact. But the big thing we just want you to keep in mind is that these dollars really feed into what we're able to give to our kids every day, whether it be through staffing, through professional development to learn how to better assist our kids, whether it be feeding our kids, providing health services to our kids. So all of these dollars go into those critical services that we provide. So a quick overview of Sparta. We have about a $47 million budget. So you're going to see a lot of dollar amounts tonight, and just kind of think like $1 million, that's a lot of money, and it's in the scope of a $47 million operating budget. We also have 7 schools, over 2,800 students. We employ over 500 through teachers, educational assistants, cooks, and so on. 11% of our student body are English language learners, so English is not their primary language at home. We also have 7% of our population that is active military, and 52% of our population is free and reduced, meaning the lower income. And then we have 20% of our student body receive special education services. And these dynamics we'll go over in just a minute, but this is the data that really feeds into the federal funding that we receive. So, going back to the federal level, federal grants, the way that that is determined is first through legislation. So the federal government determines what types of priorities they have and what they want to support. Then they do appropriations, which is deciding how much they're going to put into supporting those different priorities and activities. After they decide how much, they then give the award. Most of our funding comes through the Department of Education, which the award goes through DPI, or our state education agency, and then it comes to us as a pass-through. And then lastly, there's accountability, which is on us to make sure that we're meeting all of the compliance requirements to continue receiving federal funding. So when the money gets appropriated and then awarded to the state gives it to the local school districts in one of 2 ways. One way is called a formula, which goes back to that data that I talked to you about, or those statistics. And basically, we get this money without having to ask for it based on what our statistics are. So district to district, the amount of money that districts receive changes, and even year to year. So although the amounts are relatively the same each year, our allocation does change each year based on our data. There's also competitive grants, which we have to apply for. So these grants get published. The only way you get access to that money is if you apply for it and then are awarded. And we have some of both of these types of grants. So all federal grants and federal funding is subject to various laws and regulations. And we're not going to go through all of them, but just wanted you to be aware that there are many different federal and state laws, guidelines, regulations that we must follow in order to continue receiving this money each year. in general, some of the things that we have to follow are we have to have many written procedures. Written procedures for how we manage the cash, how we ensure that we're selecting vendors that don't have conflict of interest, how we're determining that we're spending the money on things that meet the goals and priorities of the grant. We have to ensure that if we're charging staff to the grant, that we're keeping appropriate time records and that they're working on grant activities. We have to follow certain purchasing processes and procedures to ensure, again, that those dollars are being spent wisely, and then all kinds of reporting.
So in Sparta, in the current year, 24-25, the DPI awarded us over $2 million in federal funding grants. And that does not include the nutrition program or Medicaid. So the paper that you have in front of us, in front of you, dives into the different funding sources that we receive grants from. And I'll dive into those a little bit more slide by slide so that you learn what each of those grants does and the funding that we receive from that. So one of the grants that we receive is called the Carl Perkins CTE grant. And the purpose of this grant is to support the development improvement of career and technical education programs. So we receive about $30,000. This is a formula grant. So again, a formula grant is one that we receive because we meet the criteria, and they just give us that amount based on the formulas that they have set, the state and federal government have set. And we use that funds in our district for CTE. So CTE is Career and Technical Education, staff development, for field trips for students, for supplies and equipment to support ag, business, foods, and tech ed programming. Another grant that we receive is IDEA flow-through, and the purpose of this grant is to provide funding to ensure free and appropriate public education for children with disabilities. We receive almost $700,000 in this grant. This is another formula grant, and we use these funds to provide staffing, professional development, software, curriculum, private vendor contracts, equipment, and supplies. But know that this grant only covers a small portion of the funding that we spend on our students with disabilities.
So students with disabilities, our budget each year is approximately $7 to $8 million. This is $700,000, so 10% of our funding for special education roughly comes from the federal government.
We also have an IDEA preschool grant, and the purpose of this is to specifically support the special education services for preschool-aged students with disabilities. We receive about $18,000 in this grant, which is another formula grant. And we use this money to provide staffing for the Roundup. Roundup helps us to identify students that are 3 and 4 years old that may have disabilities, and it helps also to provide equipment and supplies for our preschool program. We also receive funding for Title I-A. Title I-A allocates resources to improve the academic achievement in reading and math for disadvantaged students. We serve Title I-A through school-wide programming in our schools that receive funding. Funding for Title I is school-specific, so only the schools that have the highest percentages of students receiving free and reduced lunch qualify for Title I funding. We receive just over $600,000. This is another formula grant, and we use the funds for this mainly for staffing. Right now we have 5 interventionists and 3 educational assistants who support interventions. We also purchase software and workbooks that support interventions. Title II-A supports efforts to improve the quality and effectiveness of teachers, principals, and other school leaders. We receive almost $100,000 in funding for Title II-A, which is another formula grant. We use funds for Title IIA to provide stipends for teachers or other staff that attend training. We contract with CISA to provide training and coaching for our staff, and then to send staff to professional development. Title IIIA provides funding to help our English learners and immigrant students to attain English proficiency and to meet academic standards. Our funding amount is almost $30,000. This is another formula grant. So this is where that meeting the criteria is important. If we didn't have EL students, those English learners, we wouldn't qualify for Title III. We use funds here to contract services with CISA. We have online and print-based resources for English language acquisition as well. Title IV-B, Community Learning Centers, supports the creation of community learning centers to provide academic enrichment opportunities for children, particularly those attending high poverty schools. Our funding amount is $100,000 per year. Now this is a competitive 5-year grant. So competitive, meaning that we had to apply for this grant. This is a 5-year grant. We are currently in year 3. This is only the WIN program at Herman is the only school that has applied for this grant, and it does pay for staffing and supplies for Herman, but not 100% of the programming is funded through this grant. I don't know what the percentage is, do you?
Roughly 25% of the cost to run the WIN program at Herman is paid for by this grant.
And then the remaining comes out of Fund 80.
Comes out of Fund 80 or the tax levy. So this $100,000 each year helps reduce the tax levy to provide the after-school programming to our students.
Title IV-A is the most flexible funding support. It helps to fund well-rounded educational opportunities, safe and healthy students, and the effective use of technology. We receive roughly $45,000 in grant funding. It is another formula grant. We use this funding source to provide training for counselors because counselor training is not supported out of Title II. Title II, they don't consider counselors school leaders. So we pay for their professional development out of Title IV. We also pay for district software licenses like Pear Deck, Newsella, Turnitin, BrainPop, School AI, and then Reallyville, which is a social emotional learning curricular platform. We also have a Wisconsin Charter Schools grant right now, which is to provide funding to support the establishment and expansion of high-quality charter schools within Wisconsin. The funding amount of this grant is $647,000 over 3 years. This is another competitive grant. This is a 3-year grant, and we are currently in the last year, wrapping up the final spending of this grant. And the way that we've used the funds for this grant were for Innovation STEM Academy. That was a school that applied for and received this grant. They have purchased technology and resources for their additional students, for staff training, technology tools, and a marketing campaign. So those are the federal grants that we've received. All of those run through WISE grants. So when you look at that sheet of paper that I printed off for you, WISE grants is the platform that we use to budget and to submit our claims, and so basically we spend the money and then we get reimbursed from the state.
So the bulk of our federal money is from the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, and flows through DPI to us. So the ones on your sheet are the ones that are overseen by DPI, but we also have federal funding that's not through the Department of Education, which is what we're going to go over next. So those are all education-driven federal funding, and then we have ones that support education but are not through the Department of Education.
And when I gave you that funding source, that $2 million on that first page, that does not include the amounts now that I'm giving you here. So I just want to be clear so you know that these amounts here are in addition to that $2 million on that sheet of paper that you have. So nutrition services, again, not a grant, but nutrition services help to provide low-cost or free meals for students, especially those from low-income families. We receive $1.6 million in funding to support this, which is only a partial reimbursement to provide nutritious breakfast and lunch meals within our district. And again, 52% of our students receive free or reduced meals. And when we go back to that Title I funding and which schools are Title I schools, that's all based on the percentage of schools that have the highest free and reduced lunch.
Many federal grants are based on that free reduced lunch number, including some federal funding that isn't on our slides tonight because it varies so much, but we receive something called E-rate funding also, which supports technology infrastructure for communications. And so when we need to wire our buildings or put wireless throughout our buildings, all of the things that help our students communicate technologically, that is all supported by federal funding as well. And that is derived from our free reduced number also.
We also have Medicaid reimbursement. Medicaid reimbursement provides financial assistance for health services, which are delivered to eligible students, which are primarily those with disabilities or in low-income families. And we receive roughly $430,000 from this funding source. We use the funds here, again, as a partial reimbursement for services such as speech and occupational therapy, physical therapy, and mental health services support for students with IEPs. And then we also have applied for 3 cycles now we've applied for and received a DODEA grant. A DODEA grant comes from the Department of Defense, and this current grant supports science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, and social emotional learning, or SEL. The funding amount for this grant is a $750,000 grant over 5 years. It is a competitive one, and we are currently in year 4, wrapping up year 4. We've used the funds for this grant to purchase SEL resources, to provide staff training, purchase classroom equipment and supplies, and contract with CISA to provide coaching support.
Before we go into this slide, we also have received other federal funds, even in the past 5 years. These are all what we've received this school year. But federal funds really do impact even different initiatives that we're looking to explore. So for example, as we're coming up on our new construction project, we're looking at ways that we can apply for federal grants to help offset some of that cost to make our $87 million go even further. For example, there's federal safety grants out there. So some of the safety equipment we're putting in schools, can we get federal money for? There are federal grants for clean energy. So if we put solar or any other clean energy, can we get reimbursements for that? So federal money for next year, looking forward, is everything we've covered, and we're always continuing to explore, because the more we can tap into those federal grants, the better we can spend the money from our local taxpayers, or even reduce the money we need to tax locally.
So just to wrap up, the impact of the federal funds really has a big impact on our students and our staff. It nourishes our students by making sure that all of our students have healthy meals. It supports our diverse learners. I hope as you've seen that first slide, you've learned a little bit about who our students are in Sparta. These funds really do help to provide the necessary staff and resources so that all students can be successful and all of their needs are met. It does promote equitable access to make sure that we do level the playing field and make sure that all students have opportunities in Sparta. It empowers our educators by investing in professional development to make sure that teachers can be as excellent as possible. Levels the playing field by offering essential resources to help all students succeed. It helps to forge future pathways by preparing students with the skills and knowledge they need for successful futures. And it fosters innovative learning by expanding access to hands-on experiences and cutting-edge technology. And thank you to Gemini for helping me wordsmith on this last slide. So with that, we appreciate you coming, and we'll open it up to you for any questions.
I have a couple of questions. With the reimbursement program, how does that work with cash flow for you? Like, so you spend it, and then you have to wait till the end of the school season to get reimbursed for that money?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is no limit on how, so nearly all federal funding, you spend it, and then you submit a claim, and then you get reimbursed. Typically, districts do that about quarterly, so about every 3 months, but there is no limit. You can do it as frequently as you would like. The guidance more recently has been to submit them more frequently, so we've been doing that just to ensure that we continue to get reimbursements with uncertainty of different federal programs and things. So at minimum quarterly, but sometimes more frequently, or if we need the cash flow, we always have that opportunity.
Another question I had, with your formula grants, do you apply for more than the ones that are listed here and don't get rewarded them? Or you have the set ones that you always apply for on an annual basis?
So there are ones we can opt into, and we do explore those, but any that, there are lots of reporting requirements and things that go along with these grants, and any that are, would produce enough to justify kind of all of the things that go along with it, we always keep our eyes open for those, and we believe we're maximizing what's available for us right now. But yes, we do look into those when we learn of new ones and see, you know, what we can do. Yep.
Now, just a second half of that question. Do you know from the federal level for the state of Wisconsin for these grants, do you know what the dollar amount is when you apply, like what it looks like for the whole state and how they disperse that?
I was laughing because we do, and she had that on a slide, and I'm like, get rid of it.
So
those are really big numbers.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, so when we apply for grants, do we know how much we're applying for? Is that what your question is?
Well, that's part of it. Like I would like to know, like, okay, when the grants are available, the federal government allocates $2 trillion to the state of Wisconsin. Now, how does that? How do you know what you're eligible for? Do you ask for X amount of dollars of this?
So, the formula grants, you're just told.
Okay.
So, for example, and I just sent an email to Mr. Russ and Ms. Hauser today and said, this is how much we're getting for next year for Title I. Here's the spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet that's shared out with us, and it says this is your funding for Title I. So the DPI says, this is the amount that the federal government is giving to Wisconsin, and the DPI says this is how we're breaking that up, and here's what each school district is getting. So we don't apply for it; it's just told to us what that amount is.
I can take that a little further. The federal year runs October through September, and the state and the school year run July through June. So there is a window that we can get kind of a heads up for our budgeting process. And because they're formula grants, they really are driven by formulas, so you can do some estimating and forecasting to try and see. And then also because they come through DPI, we go through to updates throughout the year where DPI is saying, titles, you know, you might want to be looking at a 5% decrease, for example. So we can take our balance this year, and so we can do some projecting and forecasting that's not completely blind year to year.
Sure. Thank you.
And when there's grants that we are applying for, So those typically so like the DODEA grant, we just applied for another 5-year grant. And so we knew how much we were applying for. So those you typically apply for a certain amount.
Do you aim high, I'm assuming? Or do you know what the threshold is?
So sometimes, like the DODEA, it was when your school district is this size, this is the amount. So some of them, there's certain parameters. Some of them you have to, it all depends on what the grant requirements are. I'd say most grants have certain requirements that you follow.
We do have a methodology though, so with competitive grants, I mean, the sky's the limit with the number of them that are out there. You could hire multiple full-time people and that could be all they do. That being said, our methodology as a district is not to go apply for everything and then start all these new programs based off of what grants we receive. Our methodology is, this is our vision, this is our strategic plan, this is where we're headed. Is there a grant out there that matches those goals that we already want to achieve? And so then that really dwindles down that list and we can get focused in on it, and then we work as a team to write those grants. So STEM, we knew that that was a priority, clearly. We know we've had a waiting list. We knew there was desire for the program to grow, so we went and wrote that grant. Department of Defense, we know that it's really well received in the community. We knew it supported our goals with STEM and with social emotional learning, and so they kind of married well together, and so we put the effort into going in and applying for that. Similarly, there's one coming up with safety. We know we're always increasing what we can do for safety infrastructure stuff in our district, and so we found a grant that aligns with that. So competitive, we try to make sure that we're not writing grants for the sake of writing grants, but that they really support what we're doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Given the fact that the House has passed the budget bill and sent it to the Senate, do we have any information that on the impact, potential impact on the budget for next year?
No. The only recommendations that we've been getting from the state level is kind of going back to Will's question, complete your claims frequently because there is so many unknowns right now. So at least what you have coming to you, get those claims in. As far as looking to next year, basically stay the course is the direction we've been given. Don't change anything drastically, but be ready to adjust if you need to. So that creates a difficult time right now because we're in unknowns with the state budget. Districts who are going to operating referendums, that creates an unknown for them, and then the federal unknown. So hopefully over the summer we will learn a lot more, but right now there are a lot of unknowns.
You mentioned state grants and then you expanded on that just a little bit. Have we applied for these grants in the past? And did you say that we have applied currently for the upcoming year, and if we have, what in our long-range plan are we targeting for that state?
Yeah, we definitely have had multiple competitive grants over the years. Including some for safety, but those were state level, and this is a federal level one that we're looking at. I would say, in looking at our long-range plans for technology and buildings and grounds, if there are significant enough projects that we know have traction at the federal level, because usually, going back to that slide, the federal, they look for different priority areas, and then they give appropriations based on those. So we know clean energy has been a priority area. That's something that usually there's grant funding for. Anything regarding school safety, you can typically find STEM is very, popular with granting agencies. And so the other thing with federal money is it's to provide something new or above and beyond what you're already providing. You can't get federal funds to supplement or reduce the amount of local money you were already spending. And so when we look at our long-range plans, if it's replacing something that we already have, that probably wouldn't qualify for federal money. But if it's providing some new opportunity or new service, that's when you can usually look to grant.
So specifically for the safety
Mhm.
grants, perhaps the secure entrances?
You got it. Yep. Video cameras, communication systems, door buzzers, anything that creates a secure envelope for building infrastructure. Internet specifically, no, that would be more on the E-rate side. So there is federal funding for it, but not necessarily under safety.
Yes, I have a question. Just on the outlook of, have you been able to identify has anything been placed on your radar of something coming in the future that is an area of concern, or, are we going into it blind, or do we have some signs and indicators?
So, I mean, one that's been in the headlines the past couple of weeks is Medicaid. We receive a lot of Medicaid funding. Medicaid's a massive program. Is the Medicaid we receive even correlated with what's been in the news? We don't know, so kind of keeping an eye open. E-rate has been in the news a lot for, is it staying, is it going? Everything we've heard to date is that you don't need to worry about something leaving. That being said, the federal government, they always do their budgets a year ahead of time. So theoretically, the budget for our next school year is already done. So theoretically, we should have federal funding all of next year with no problem. But things can change very quickly. And so even if in previous years that may have been the case, we don't know if that'll continue to be the case. So it's really more just our ears are extra tuned in to all of the advice around us. But not necessarily that we're making all these contingency plans or anything. It's just more that awareness right now and being ready